Marxist?
I'm a Marxist because society is divided between classes, and that's the fundamental division across the entire world. So it's a unifying force across the entire world.
But where has there ever been a successful Marxist state?
Good question. There have been various attempts to create things which are socialist. Some have achieved some big victories.
Could you say where?
The Soviet Union managed to achieve the defeat of Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union managed to raise living standards of the population, but at the same time they had a dictatorship. And that dictatorship was opposed by many Marxists. I mean, the people who were here didn't believe that was the type of regime they supported. I have a different point of view on that, to their point of view. But I moved to East Germany. I lived in East Germany before the Berlin Wall came down, and I was active in the opposition in East Germany before the Berlin Wall came down as a Marxist, opposing the leadership of the regime in that country.
So for you, so you mentioned the Soviet Union as an example of advancing class, would you say? To bring people out of, say, a feudal society and into a more
Developed society.
More
developed society.
But obviously that came at a huge cost. I think it's 40 million people. So is that justified for you then? So you can advance the class, but still 40 million people are done. Is that worthwhile for you? So in Britain, say, if we brought in Marxism, would you be comfortable with millions of people dying?
I don't agree firstly with the figures you gave about deaths in the Soviet Union, but let's leave that aside.
But say it's 20 million.
I don't think that's correct either, but in any case, you're talking about when millions died. Millions died in the Second World War, millions died in the First World War, millions died in imperial domination established by Britain and the major powers in the world when they brought capitalism to the entire world. Millions and millions and millions of people died. For example, from 1943 to 1945, 3 million people died in India while we exported food from India to feed the troops and feed the war effort in the West. That's almost as many people as died in Auschwitz, caused by a British organised famine. And there are many instances like that in the history of India and the history around the world, orchestrated by the ruling classes in the Western world.
So what I would say, I don't know if you know, actually with I believe it's the Bengal famine, isn't it, you're talking about there?
Yeah.
So actually what happened is we were trying to move grain into India. So boats were coming up from New Zealand and Australia, but Japanese and German U-boats kept sinking them. So actually we were trying to help people. In the end, the effort was actually usurped by the Japanese fascists. So this is actually not attributed to Britain, but besides the point, so you're saying you're comfortable with an ideology.
Do that down there, mate, because it's not the great.
Well, they're doing it here.
I don't care.
They're doing that here.
So why are you trying to shut this up?
They're doing it. Leave them alone. Leave them alone. They're doing this already. They're doing it already. Is it better to debate?
This is our event. We're not going to be.
Yeah, but that's your event there. This is an open street. No one's going to close them down, are they? So they're going to be here one way or another. So what's the point in trying to stop them?
All we want is
if they're offering a debate, why not engage in a debate? If they're offering a debate, this is an open street, mate. They're going to be here. You don't have a right to force them off the street, do you?
Sir, why are you behaving like this? Why are you scared? We were actually having a discussion. We were trying to reach some common ground.
Just leave it.
We live in a society.
They're here. They got a megaphone.
With each other.
What's the matter with you? Yeah, just de-escalate it, exactly. What's the point?
All we're trying to do is have a talk.
I agree, there's a lot of intolerance around, I think a lot of that is a consequence of the lockdowns that were imposed on the world last couple of years. People became intolerant, they became divisive, they became turned one against another. You're vax, you're not vax, you're a plague rat, and so on. I had that myself. And it needs to de-escalate. People don't know how to engage in democratic debate anymore. I don't agree with your point of view, but I'm happy to debate it. Simple as that. That's what I've been doing 35 years.
Well, actually, we might have some common ground, because I'm sure you're very anti the corporatist society we live in at the moment. In terms of you have multiple multinationals coming here, not paying their taxes, rinsing the British taxpayer, and not investing the money back into it. It tends to be American companies, particularly you've got your Starbucks, McDonald's, Amazon, the usual ones. So what's your opinion on that in terms of the corporations who are coming here and sort of strip mining our country? So we'd say that's corporatism, not capitalism.
I don't think it's valid to say that there's something specific about foreign companies. I think British and foreign companies exploit the working classes. And the largest companies, I'm not talking about your fish and chip shop and your small enterprise or whatever, the large companies should be taken into public ownership and democratically controlled. That's what socialism is. It's about struggling to achieve a society in which the wealth of society is used for the benefit of all.
Well, can you name any socialist organisations in the UK which are actually succeeding at the moment? And you're probably going to say NHS, but that's not. Because we would argue, in a nice world, in an ideal world, you could trust the government to, with taxpayer money, sure, but we live in a society where humans are fallible. So what we would argue is we want the least amount of government intervention in our life.
Well, funny enough, the argument between Marx and the anarchists was about the state. And Marx said that in order to overthrow capitalism, you have to establish a new state, which would be a semi-state, a withering state, that would gradually disappear as people exercise control over their lives and gain control over the economy and over the instruments of force. In other words, the majority of the population, as in America, for example, in one way, would be armed, and they would be under what they call militias, and these militias would then gradually cease to use force against the population for the simple reason that the antagonisms that give rise to the conflicts begin to wane away. The state is a product of the antagonism between classes.
So I agree, but for different reasons there. So I actually support the devolution of powers to smaller communities. I think each council should have a lot more powers. They should be able to dictate, and that's kind of a winner for everyone. Because if you're going to somewhere like Liverpool and they want to be a socialist republic or whatever, fantastic. If my area down south wants to be a bit more conservative and have our own things, fantastic. And then we have a bit more of a federal system where we can agree on what we do in terms of national policies. Everyone has a representative, but actually we are all left to our own devices. And I think that's the way to actually end a lot of the division in the UK, to give people a chance to actually live in communities which represent their values.
I mean, I do think the idea that a devolved power is important has been illustrated by what happened during the lockdowns, because people should have been able to completely resist those lockdowns and the control over the population which the state exercised in the name of healthcare. So I'm a little bit more sceptical perhaps of the NHS, as a lot of people are, because the NHS has become an instrument for big pharma and big tech and for the so-called scientific community to impose dictatorial powers over the world. And that's what's happened with the WHO pandemic treaty recently. They're trying to impose a regime internationally where they can impose dictatorial powers at will. And that must be resisted at a grassroots level.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time. I hope that was as interesting for you as it was for me. Very nice to meet you, sir.
Oh, sorry about that, mate.
You're welcome.
Thank you, mate. Sorry.
This is what we're looking for, guys. Your Socialist Workers' Party is incredibly divisive. But what we're trying to do is find common ground with different communities and bring people together to talk and look at the points we agree on and work together to solve them issue by issue. This country has a lot of problems. Some of it has been caused by corporatism, a lot of it has been caused by socialism. So we need to band together if we actually want change. If we're divided and we don't talk to each other, it's only